of people in clown outfits trying to lure children into the woods with candy.
It sounds like a plotline out of some horror movie, but people in Greenville in an apartment complex there say this is happening to them.
Hello everybody and welcome back for another video. Today we're going to be talking the Nephilim Looked Like Clowns. Now the inspiration for this video, it actually came from a video series. I think it was like a 10-part video series that I saw on YouTube maybe in 2016. And what was being put forward in that series was this concept that what we know today as a clown and the way a clown looks and some of the behaviors of a clown or clowns in general might actually be derived from what's referred to as the Nephilim. And I know that sounds like a stretch, but when you start to look into some of these things, it gets interesting. So this series is no longer the channel that created the content is still on YouTube, but hasn't produced videos for a long time. But this series has been removed, and I wanted to just sort of hit on some of the key points that were brought up, and I will leave links to the channel, and because I found another channel that re-uploaded this series, so I'll leave a link to all that. Now, getting into this topic a little bit, you know, we have this association with not only clowns as being entertaining, but we associate them with certain characteristics like red hair, pale skin, as well as you know, the blood red nose, and also certain characteristics like tricksters, mischievous, and now even we're getting these associations between clowns being evil, both in the media and in movies. We see this concept that clowns being evil is a common theme in a lot of movies these days, as well as being tricksters and mischievous, like I said. So is there any chance that that's actually coming from somewhere or from something? And what's being put forward in this series is that this is a representation of, in some way, of the Nephilim. Now where things start getting interesting is when you start looking at the history of giants. Especially you have the mysterious cave of the redhead giants, and how many native tribes in the northeast and southwest, they still speak about legends of giants with red hair, and how their ancestors fought long and terrible wars against these giants. And you think of the Paiute Indians, who are native to parts of Nevada, Utah, and Arizona, and they would tell the white people the stories of the battles of that their ancestors had with a race of fierce giants who had pale skin in addition to red hair. So that's an interesting connection, and I think it's in the Bible in the book of Numbers, chapter 13, verse 33, where they talk about the Nephilim and their giant stature. So it is interesting that we have this association: Nephilim, pale skin, red hair; clowns, pale skin, red hair. I don't know about them being giant, but interesting. That's an interesting point. And just thinking about red hair in general, you know, we've got these interesting ties to like these elongated skulls having red hair, and even the giant Moai statues on Easter Island having these red caps. Now, just as a point of fact, I should mention that the appearance that we sort of associate with a clown, a lot of that was developed apparently in 1801 by this person, Joseph Grimaldi. And what's referred to as the white-faced clown was originally designed by him, as I mentioned, in 1801. But the idea being put forward in this video series that I watched was what if the inspiration behind this appearance is actually something else entirely, and he was pointing to the Nephilim. Okay, here's where things take a twist. I was reading this article talking about why do people who take DMT see these jesters and tricksters. And what I wanted to mention, and this is just an excerpt from that article, the text, but what I wanted to mention is Joe Rogan, who's got one of the most popular podcasts in the world. He actually took DMT and he ran into these jesters. And he talked about it, how they were sort of taunting him. And now in the article, it talks about how strangely these jester-type entities commonly appear in the DMT experience. So people encounter these clowns, jesters, jokers during their experiences with DMT. Now, these entities are often engaged in elaborate and mind-boggling performances and tricks. But it's not only their behavior, which is interesting, but their environment is interesting because many people find themselves in strange dimensions that resemble a circus or a carnival or a casino. So you've got these entities that people bump into who are mischievous, and they kind of act like clowns, and their environment is a circus. So what do we have obviously here? We've got the clown. Not only do we have clowns who have this, the pale skin, the red hair, all that, but they're associated with circuses. So what if what we have here in the physical is actually paying homage to these non-physical entities? Just something to think about. And the appearances, at least of these DMT jesters that people see, a lot of times, and I'm sure it varies, but a lot of times they speak about these entities having these two protrusions from their head. And also they'll see checkerboard patterns in and around, around these figures or entities. And on message boards like DMT Nexus, people talk about a lot of these strange coincidences of seeing these entities and some of the things they see. Now, in culture, there are cultures that refer to these entities as well, and you have the Hopi people and their sacred clowns. So you've got this concept, the Pueblo clowns, and they have these rituals where they dress up like jesters and tricksters, and they paint themselves with these striped patterns, and they have these headdresses with these protrusions, and you start looking at some of the figures associated with these rituals, and it looks just like these entities, these stripes, the protrusions, pale face, and you just kind of got to wonder what's going on. And then you find out the Kosher is a sacred clown of the Hopi, one that you're likely to see at the Katsina ceremonies. He is one of several clowns which are sometimes called jesters or tricksters. And they say the Koshers are sacred entities of the Pueblo world. But so you can see the protrusions, the stripes, what's put forward in the series, and I wouldn't be surprised if these are indeed real entities that are non-physical, and the Pueblos were interacting with these entities, and it's the same entities that people who take DMT are encountering. And it's not just an archetype. It's not the collective unconscious or collective consciousness, but we're talking about real entities, and their environment is very circus-like, and what we're seeing in the physical is just a recreation of that. Just sort of this weird concept. But in movies, right, we got the Mad Hatter, Alice in Wonderland, the main the main character, pale face, red hair. You had also in that movie the Red Queen, pale faced, and I believe in the background you had this jester here figure with the pale faced protrusions, and also, we look at McDonald's and Ronald McDonald's and the Hamburglar. They got their stripes, Ronald McDonald, obviously the clown motif, and it just makes you wonder if the influence of all this is not what we think it is. But talking about the Hamburglar and the hat, and of course you got the Mad Hatter with the hat. Just as a side note, a lot of people who have night terrors, sleep paralysis, they will talk about seeing a figure with a hat who seems to be sort of controlling the experience, and a lot of times he's wearing a flannel shirt, which sounds strange, but of course we have movie Nightmare on Elm Street. He's wearing that patterned sweater with the stripes, and he's got a hat on, so just sort of a interesting side note. But we have Beetlejuice, right? He's this pale-faced character who is a troublemaker, and he's irreverent. A lot of these same characteristics just keep popping up, and I wanted to show you a 25-second clip from this series that I saw, and it's going to be somebody who's drawing a demon, and as he's drawing it and showing it, there's a manifestation that happens in the video, and it's going to have some relation to this image that you're seeing with Beetlejuice here. So let's take a quick look at that short clip. Okay, so it's really grainy and it's low quality here, but this person's showing a drawing that he did of a demon that he saw, and as he's doing it, you got something's materializing behind him, and it looks like it's attached to him, and it's got that stripe pattern, and it's going to disappear from the camera. And I'll let this run once more, and it's sort of behind him here. You could just sort of, as he's showing this picture of a demon he drew, you sort of have something that seems to be materializing behind him. And I can't speak to the veracity of this video, but I found it pretty interesting. So I just wanted to show it with you guys, and it's going to disappear once more here. So what I did was I just took a snapshot on the left from that video, and on the right you have Beetlejuice. And if it is indeed a legitimate video, it's interesting that you've got some entity appearing that seems to have a lot of the same visual characteristics with clowns and portrayals of these characters that we see in movies. Something to think about. And there's carnivals, many carnivals, but the Carnival of Basel is the biggest carnival in Switzerland, and people dressing up as clowns, and of course UNESCO's involved, and they want to preserve that cultural heritage. Makes sense. But yeah, here's just an image from that carnival, and why do we do this, right? Like, why do we dress up like clowns? This specific type of clown with the stripes and the pale face. And of course you got clowns in hospitals. Clown care, also known as hospital clowning, involves visits in healthcare facilities, involving visits from specially trained clowns. Now I should mention, a lot of good is done, and you got a lot of people with good intent dressing up as clowns and bringing a smile to children who need a smile. So there's a lot of good being done, but it's just what we're questioning is the root of this. Like, why clowns, and specifically why pale-faced, red-headed clowns? And when you look at the Shriner hospitals, of course, there's connections to Masonry, right? Not all Masons are Shriners, but all Shriners are Masons. And again, we talked about this checkerboard pattern, the pale face, and now we have, this connection with children. And on the surface, it seems fine. And like I said, a lot of good is done. But now when you think secret society and this, now we're looking at like why the pale-faced, red-headed clown, now it sort of takes a different tone, but just something to point out. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the beginning of the video, I first saw this series on this channel called Understanding Conspiracy. So I will leave a link to, this is his channel name. You can search for him in YouTube, but I will also leave a link to the video series that I found that's been uploaded on another channel. Hello everybody, and welcome back for another episode. Today we're going to be talking The Nephilim Looked Like Clowns Part 2, and this will be the final episode in this series. And again, what I'm going to touch on today is I'm going to go into a little more depth onto some of the things I touched on in Part 1, as well as maybe introduce a few new wrinkles to the topic. And I'll leave a link to the original series that I drew the inspiration from. But just to summarize real quick, in Part 1 we talked about these tales of these red-headed giants, pale-faced red-headed giants who had a cannibalistic nature, so sort of an evil intent. And then we also looked at these clowns, these jesters, and how now they're associated. They seem to have an evil intent associated with them, and they have the pale skin, a lot of times red hair. They have this interesting clothing we see a lot of times, these checkerboards, black and white, these stripes. And again, just in the Batman movie 1989, we had the Joker and his goons who were mimes for some reason. But again, we got the pale face and the interesting clothing with these striped patterns. So they keep putting this stuff in front of us. And I talked about the Pueblo clowns in Part 1 and how they kind of dressed up and they look like jokers or jesters that people see when they take DMT. Well, a lot of you alerted me to this. There was a tribe, a native tribe in Tierra del Fuego, which is, I guess it's in southern Chile or Argentina, I guess. But it's at the southern tip of South America. And this particular tribe, called the Selknam tribe, they had this ceremony, this initiation ceremony, and they had these very elaborate, I don't know if costumes is the right word, but they would dress very elaborately with these intricate designs, and one of them looks very much like what the Pueblo clowns would dress up as, and it's the one on the right here. And again, Tierra del Fuego is way at the bottom of South America, but so we're talking thousands of miles away, a different continent, and thousands of miles away from the American Southwest, where you had the Pueblo clowns. But they're sort of pretty much they're looking identical, and I think people report seeing entities that look like this in the spirit realm when they take DMT. But again, these tribes are separated by continents, thousands of miles, but they seem to be portraying, I believe, an entity that resides in the spirit world. So I wanted to mention that. And again, Joe Rogan, he talked about his DMT experience. But yeah, people encounter clowns, jesters, jokers, and sometimes even scenes that resemble a circus, as well as these checkerboard patterns, these black and white stripes. And I didn't mention this in the first video, but the Freemasons, there's a couple of offshoots of Freemasonry, and one of them is called the Royal Order of Jesters. And all of the people who belong to this Royal Order of Jesters, they are indeed Freemasons, but specifically they're Shriners. And all Shriners are Masons. So it's interesting, you have this secret society, and they really seem focused on jokers and jesters and clowns. Again, the Shriners themselves, all Shriners are Masons. All jesters are Shriners. So at the end of the day, they're all Masons, but these Shriners, again, they like to dress up like clowns, and they're associated with hospitals and children. So you got two branches of this secret society, and they're seem pretty fixated on what I believe are actually entities in the non-physical realm. But as far as these patterns goes, I want to elaborate a little bit on this, because people see these stripe patterns, these zigzag patterns, these black and white patterns when they take DMT, for instance. And I think this gets put in front of us in the media, and some directors and producers, sometimes I believe they put it in their TV shows and movies, such as David Lynch. I believe he does this, and you can see, for instance, in Twin Peaks, the TV series directed by Dave Lynch, there was this red room, this extra dimensional space that they would show from time to time, and people walked backwards and did all kinds of talk backwards in this particular extra dimensional space. But the floor was this particular pattern, and David Lynch has a history of showing this floor. And one of his earlier movies, Eraserhead from 1977, again, this similar zigzag type of pattern on the floor. And he actually had a short film, if you want to call it that, on his YouTube channel. It's like 1.5 minutes, but it shows, this is what you're seeing on screen. This is pretty much the setting for the entire 1.5 minutes. But again, it's the same pattern, and we see it in movie videos. Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, this song "Don't Come Around Here No More." I believe this is supposed to be the Mad Hatter, Alice in Wonderland, and you can see again these same checkerboard patterns, these zigzag patterns. For some reason, they keep this other dimension, they keep associating these patterns with that dimension and some of these entities. So it's interesting. And now, in part, this is going to take me into talking about this phenomena called liquid crystal polarization, because in part 1, I showed a little short video of a gentleman drawing, I believe he was drawing an alien or a demon, and as he was drawing what he saw, it appeared like something was materializing behind him, and it was very much in line with this black and white checker or striped patterns. And I didn't realize there's a lot of examples of this phenomena, and I guess it's termed liquid crystal polarization. And I'll leave a link to one of the videos showing it with regard to Bob Marley, but I'm going to show you a few examples. And I just took some snapshots, and this is from an interview Bob Marley was giving, where initially everything's fine, but as he starts talking during the interview, these weird zigzag patterns start forming specifically around him. And I just was unaware of this phenomenon, but I think in light of what we're talking about, pretty interesting. And somebody mentioned Robert Pattinson, the Twilight movies. I guess he was doing some promotional work, and during the interview he's talking, and then you get this just weird phenomena. And again, it's localized to him, And I mean, just again, I can't speak to the validity of all this, but in light of what we're talking about, it's an interesting phenomena. And this individual, just somebody giving an interview on their local news outlet, and this phenomena, again, it just appears randomly, but associated. It's like not affecting any of the structure behind him, but it seems very localized. And I believe this was just another interview. Some people doing an interview. I don't know if this was CNN or not, but as they're talking, you just get this crazy effect that happens. And even if you look at her shoulder here, it's just really bizarre. So could this be linked to some influence from this other realm? Who knows? But it seems to kind of go in line with what we're talking about here. So I just wanted to mention it. Again, I'll leave a link to the Bob Marley video and you can check it out. But I just wanted to go a little more in depth on that. And this whole notion of dressing up in drag and painting your face white, and the clothing, like the striped patterns, the zigzag patterns. So things to think about. Is this whole idea of dressing like this and painting your face white, has that been implanted into these narratives and these cultures? Who knows? Now, the next thing I'd like to talk about is the curious case of test card F. Now, what is a test card? A test card, also known as a test pattern or startup close down test, it's a TV test signal, and it was typically broadcast at times when there was when no program was being broadcast. So it might be hard to believe, but there was a time when, prior to like cable TV, where TV stations would have no programming. They would stop broadcasting, and a lot of times that would be close to midnight. And what you would see, since there was no, you had dead air, you would see this test pattern, or you would see just white noise and static. But other times I remember seeing this pattern here in the bottom right a lot of times, and you would hear a tone as well. So if you turned on your TV at like 2 a.m, you might see something like this prior to the 24-hour TV cycle. But so that's what we would get in North America. You typically would see something like this, and there might be some other variations, but that's sort of what I remember. But apparently in Europe, and specifically in the UK, there was a different test card or test pattern, and it was referred to as test card F. And it really falls in line with what we're talking about. And you can just imagine my interest when I heard and started coming across articles like this talking about the test card when a girl and a clown ruled the airwaves. It's one of BBC's most iconic images, but who created it and why? So it was, I believe she was around 9, Carol Hersey, I believe her name is. And so they would show this card, and I'm going to show it here. So what people would see, instead of, the white noise or this pattern in the bottom right, instead of that, I guess, and I was unaware of this until recently doing this research, people in the UK and some other countries in Europe, they would see this on their screens. And now apparently there's a reason for this, for everything on this particular test card. On one level, there's a reason given for all of it, but where things sort of, for me, just go off the rails is this. For some reason, they got a girl and her clown playing tic-tac-toe, and I guess people sometimes call this noughts and crosses. But I couldn't believe it. And not only did people see this, but this particular test card, this was on the air for well over 30 years. that particular test card, it wasn't just showing like between midnight and early morning, but it would in the UK they would show it through at routine points throughout the day to fill in their programming gaps. So you might see it in the daytime as well, and at various points throughout the day. So just really interesting. But I mean, here's just this little girl. She was interviewed later in life, and she's been interviewed and talked about the story on how she got to be, pictured, photographed, and put on that test card. But like, this test card was on the air for 4 decades. I believe it was like 30 something. It wasn't 33, but over 30 years, people would see this test card. And I think they estimated, if you calculated all the time that particular test card was on screen for, it would like add up to like 8 years if you condensed it continuously. So I'm thinking they're quite literally programming us. So people, I guess, when they would see this test card, there would be music playing behind it. So just everything about this is just, man, I have no doubt that there was more to this test card, and it was on the air. They were showing it for so long because they seem intent on creating a connection between clowns and children. That just seems to be what they're trying to do for whatever reason. And that exo symbolism, we see it with X-Men, and also like Russell Brand, who's just part of the system. He's got the number 33 on his left wrist, but he had a TV show called Brand X, and you see this symbolism again. All just occultic stuff, but yeah, I couldn't believe it when I found out about this test card F on the air for like over 30 years, 4 decades. And it's, again, this clown symbolism, just putting it in our face constantly. So just really found it interesting, and I just wanted to bring that up, mention it. So that's about all I have to say on that. Now, transitioning a little bit, another curious case. I want to talk about the curious case of B.O.B., Bob. This all started for me when I first became aware of the Illuminati card game, and that was from the 90s. But when you start looking at some of these cards, one character comes up more so than probably any other, and that's this Bob character. Now, this Bob character, apparently in this game, there's this Church of the Subgenius. It's a parody religion, but it teaches a complex philosophy, and it focuses on this person, J.R. Dobbs, but he goes by Bob. And he's revered as a prophet by the church. So this character, Bob, just happens to be on a lot of these cards. And, I didn't think anything of it, but I just filed it away. And then I remember when the whole flat earth discussion came about, whenever that was, 2015, 16. I remember, people started coming out talking about it, and specifically this rapper by the name of B.O.B., Bob, and what really got my attention with that is the first official response to any claims of flat earth. The first official response was by, from what I can remember, is Neil deGrasse Tyson on Comedy Central, where he took the mic and did like some sort of rap, and then he dropped the mic. And I just remember how staged and choreographed I thought all that was, regardless of whatever reality there is to the whole shape of the earth discussion. I'm not even talking about that. Just that whole that whole thing seemed staged to me. This B.O.B. character seems like he's put in place. Of course, Neil deGrasse Tyson's part of the system. And that whole thing with Comedy Central, the way it played out, to me, that's completely staged. And so this person by the name of B.O.B. was one of like the biggest public names coming forth with sort of the flat earth discussion. So it just caught my attention, this person with B.O.B. And I remember the Illuminati card game. But again, I just filed it away. So then doing this research into looking at these jokers, jesters, clowns, and when I was looking into some of these Batman movies, the Joker's closest and trusted friend was Bob the Goon. He was the first lieutenant among the Joker goons. So just pretty random, but okay, so this Bob was linked with the Joker. Okay, and again, people see this Joker, people take DMT, see representations of what appear to be jokers, clowns. So again, just filed that away. But then circling all the way back to David Lynch in Twin Peaks, there was this character called Bob, and B.O.B. And Bob is an interdimensional entity who feeds on pain and sorrow. And you can find him in this interdimensional space with the zigzag patterns to bring it all back. And of course, B.O.B., the killer Bob, was a possessing spirit believed to originate from the mythical Black Lodge. He spent time on Earth possessing human beings, and that whole liquid crystal polarization, we see that attaching to people. And I mean, it's just like, whoa, it's just crazy stuff. But again, none of this is proof, but this Bob, this B.O.B., it comes up in strange places, and it seems to be linked with the Joker and interdimensional entities in this pattern. David Lynch, who seems to be in the know. Really weird, interesting stuff. But if you have any more Bob references, please let me know. Speaking of Bobs, different Bobs, we have Bob Dylan. I just wanted to mention him real quick because I guess in the 1970s, there was this Rolling Thunder Revue, which was just a concert tour by Bob Dylan, the famous American singer-songwriter. And I guess Netflix did a documentary on it. But during this Rolling Thunder Revue, he would just, dress up. He would wear masks and put white paint on. Now again, the official narrative would say it's just him being theatrical, which might be the case, but I just can't help remembering his old little 60 Minutes interview, and I'm sure most of you have heard this, but just in case you haven't, if you just do a YouTube search on Bob Dylan sells his soul. But he talks about making a deal to get him where he's at, and the reason why he continues to produce for like however long it's been, over 40 years, is because he's keeping up his end of the bargain, and he talks about the commander-in-chief of the world you can't see. And so when I just in light of everything, again, we're talking about, could there be more to this? Who knows? Maybe. Hello, everybody, and welcome back for another episode. Today, we're going to be talking about the Nephilim Looked Like Clowns, Part 3. And I'm just going to be building off of ideas put forth in the previous two videos, so I would recommend watching those before this one. But the basic premise is that the modern day clown might actually draw a lot of inspiration from the Nephilim of the past in both appearance and behavior. And also, we talked about how the Freemasons, they have a couple of offshoots, one being the Shriners, who seem to be focused on clowns and circuses, and then another branch called the Royal Order of Jesters, and of course links to jokers. So just this whole phenomena, it's really interesting the more you look into it. But just sort of doing a little more digging, there's also this link between clowns and this Lady of Guadalupe, and I believe that's supposed to be an equivalent to the Virgin Mary, if I'm not mistaken. But for some reason, once a year, there's this clown pilgrimage to this particular basilica. I think it's in Mexico City. But all these clowns go on a pilgrimage, and they go to this basilica to give thanks to this Our Lady of Guadalupe. And I believe she's a patron saint of Mexico. But, I understand the concept of giving thanks, but why clowns? Are there other professions also, going on pilgrimages to churches and giving thanks to this Lady of Guadalupe? It doesn't seem like it. So it's just really odd to me. You have this link between clowns and this Lady of Guadalupe. And there's some really just bizarre photos, but I just wanted to mention that real quick. And what I wanted to do is expand on this one topic I brought up in part 2. And you have certain movie filmmakers, such as David Lynch, and he has, of course, been responsible for TV shows like Twin Peaks and movies like Eraserhead, and he's got a YouTube channel. But he is just fond of this particular pattern. It shows up in a lot of his work, and it's this zigzag pattern. And I featured this in part 2. But you also have this phenomena called liquid crystal polarization, and you have this phenomena where during certain interviews, people would be talking, and 1 second they would appear normal, and then the next minute you would see all these zigzagging black and white patterns forming over them. And I think in part 1, I showed a video of someone drawing, I think it was like an alien or a demon, and this black and white figure sort of manifested behind him. And I think I was just showing an image of Beetlejuice here. And there's just seems to be something with this black and white pattern. And in part 2, I think I talked about, in the music video, Don't Come Around Here No More by Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, where you have this dimension and he plays the Mad Hatter, and you've got the zigzag patterns and checkerboard. And again, people who take DMT, they see jesters and jokers, and they'll talk about seeing fractals and patterns like this. So this zigzag pattern seems to have something to do with this other dimension. And I just talked about in part 2 how in Twin Peaks there was this interdimensional entity called Bob who he was a possessing spirit. And in this interdimensional space, you had these zigzag patterns again, just like you did in this music video. So keeping that in mind, there was this TV series that came out, I think it was this year, called Chucky. And you've got that evil possessed redheaded doll, right? Chucky. And in this particular series, this boy ends up coming into contact with Chucky, and this one particular bedroom is featured a lot, and it's this boy's bedroom. But like the patterns of the checkerboard the zigzag patterns just are prevalent in this room. And again, you have back here, this Bob was a possessing spirit, and you have these zigzag patterns, and you've got this possessed, red-headed, pale-faced doll in these zigzag patterns, and just bizarre. And this particular room shows up in several episodes, so it's not just like one particular scene. And I'm just scrolling through some of the different episodes with this bedroom featured, but yeah, just really weird, and just makes you wonder if that is by design. But moving on, speaking of possession, the movie The Exorcist, obviously based on a book by William Peter Blatty, and I think it was 1971. But I guess, I didn't know this, that the novel was actually based on a real case from the 40s. And it was actually a boy that was affected in the 40s. And I just found an article talking about how a suburban boy's demonic possession inspired The Exorcist. But what caught my attention for the purposes of this video is that eventually, I believe this boy, they went through an exorcism and he was delivered from his oppression. But during a blessing, a priest was called, and during this first blessing that happened in 1949, and I don't think this is his real name, but the bed, as he was being blessed, his bed began to shake, and zigzag scratches suddenly appeared on his body. So again, just, we've got this concept of a possessing spirit, these zigzag patterns. You got this possessed doll, red-headed, pale-faced doll, and you got these patterns featured again. And then you've got apparently in real life a child who was going through some oppression, on the verge of being possessed, and he's getting these zigzag scratches appear on his body. So just, again, none of this is proof. We're just looking at things, but in light of what we're talking about, just really interesting. And I guess when he finally got delivered, there was an exorcism, and I guess it took place in this particular hospital. I think it's in St. Louis, or I don't know if it's still around, but this was a photo I found of that particular hospital. Yeah, so I just wanted to mention that. And somebody actually sent me a comment that really struck a chord with me, and it was just the comment. It was based on my part 2 of the series. When you get a migraine, you see these zigzag patterns. Now, me personally, I don't get migraines. I've never had migraines, but I did experience this image on the right here. At one point, I was getting these zigzag patterns, and they appeared to be like right in front of my eye, but to the side a bit, but they were colorful, and they were in these zigzag patterns. And I just, I compartmentalized all that. I kind of buried it, but when this person mentioned seeing zigzags during migraines, that just really, I found that really interesting. So there's this fun, I guess, a term called ocular migraine, and it's used to cover several migraine subtypes that cause visual disturbances. They say that they can develop with or without accompanying pain of a classic migraine attack. But they talk about all the different things you might see, including zigzagging lines. So, man, just interesting, in light of what we're talking about. Now, these attacks, this phenomena, it's just chalked up to, I don't even know if they really give a good explanation, but I think there could be something more going on there. And there's different terms that you'll find associated with this. Fortification illusion. So people will see all kinds of interesting things during these ocular migraines, and migraine with aura. So people have depicted some of these, what they see, and just another rabbit hole. But I think there's probably more to this phenomena than what we're being told. I would tend to agree with that. Now, just briefly, real quick, while looking up all these different zigzag markings, and I came across this concept of medieval graffiti and these patterns, which were often found on or around baptismal fonts. And apparently they find a lot of these patterns in older houses, and it's believed that these were used to ward off evil spirits. And I mean, that does sound pretty ridiculous, far out, but in light of a lot of the things I've seen, it doesn't actually seem so ridiculous anymore. But this something called a hexafoil is a geometric design that is used as a traditional element of Gothic architecture. And like I said, circular scratchings in wood and rock designed to ward off evil spirits. And here's a hexafoil in stained glass window at Notre Dame. We see these all throughout a lot of these cathedrals and churches. And I just wanted to mention it. I thought it was interesting in light of kind of what we're talking about. So I'll leave that with you. And I wanted to just do a quick update on the curious case of Bob. Now, just one quick update. When I was looking in I can't remember if it was part 1 or 2, but I was talking about the Illuminati card game. And there's this one character who pops up on a lot of different cards called Bob. Now, this Bob apparently is the figurehead of the parody religion, the Church of the Subgenius, but he goes by Bob Dobbs. And a comment was kind of led me to what I'm going to talk about. And this Bob Dobbs, I guess there was a song released in the late 60s by a group called the Monkees off this particular album called Headquarters. But the lyrics in this particular song, and it's like a minute long, it's just over a minute long. It's not really even a song, but kind of more of a spoken word thing. But the lyrics, Mr. Dobalina, Mr. Bob Dobalina, and you have Bob Dobbs, Bob Dobalina. So on its own, I very well just added to the list of coincidences. And I guess somebody asked one of the band members on this particular Facebook page, who is Mr. Bob Dobalina in that track, Zilch? And what this band member just said, it was the name of a department store manager in San Antonio. And he just ends by saying, that's my story. So interesting, maybe, but where things sort of get a little more interesting is, I guess, in 1991, this particular artist, Del the Funky Homo Sapien, off this particular album, he released a single called Mr. Dobalina. And I should mention that this particular song draws inspiration and includes a vocal sample from that Monkey song called Zilch. And when you look at some of these lyrics, the chorus is very similar. Instead of Mr. Dobalina, it's Mr. But it's very similar. But when you get to some of these other verses, you got some really interesting references. One says, Mr. Dobalina is a serpent. Don't you agree? And then this particular verse, it just says, but Del is not down with any clowns or jesters. So again, we get back to the clowns and the jesters and the secret societies, and just to kind of complete the full circle here. But just a really weird connection, these two different songs. This Bob from this card game, Bob Dobbs, Bob Dobalina. Talking about Mr. Dobalina is a serpent. And Del is this artist, is not down with any clowns or jesters. I'm sure there's some more to that, but I just wanted to bring that to you guys, and I thought it was interesting. But this is going to be a shorter video, but I think that's all I have for you today. So until next time, take care. Bye. Hello everybody, and welcome back for another video. Today we're going to be talking the Nephilim Looked Like Clowns Part 4 with a focus on the Grinning Man. But we're just looking at some of these characteristics that are shared by potentially the Nephilim giants, the giants, and clowns and jesters of all things. And one of those characteristics is this unusual smile that is very unnatural. And there was this interesting documentary from 2020 that focused on the Grinning Man, and it just recounted some stories that people had about seeing this figure. But this figure that they kept talking about, a lot of times he had a hat, but he also had this just really unnerving smile, and he showed a lot of teeth. Sometimes they're very sharp teeth, but just really disconcerting. And there were just some accounts given in this documentary, but there are other accounts of grinning men, and there's another grinning man. I believe his name was Indrid Cold, and he's just reported to be a human-like in appearance, but he's commonly associated with UFO activity and sometimes believed to be an alien. So there seem to be these grinning men associated with UFO activity as well, which is just an interesting aspect to all this. And when we're talking about these unusually long and unnerving smiles, we can talk about giants as well. And there's this TV show that features all of that, and I'm going to just read this headline here. Teens are absolutely obsessed with this gory series about giant cannibal monsters. And that show is called Attack on Titan. And it just depicts these giants who have these just really bizarre smiles, and they're showing a ton of teeth, and they're cannibalistic. So it's just this characteristic that crosses over amongst many different genres. And I think there's actually an amusement park at Universal Studios of Japan, and I think they have a virtual reality ride based off of that TV show Attack on Titan, and you can have a photo op where it looks like you're about to be eaten by this giant. So yeah, that looks interesting. But keeping on the theme of amusement parks and the grinning man, we had in the United States, Coney Island in New York, Steeplechase Park. And this is just an image from 1907, but I think in 1897, Steeplechase Park introduced this mascot. Some refer to it as Steeplechase Face. Here it's mentioned as being the funny face logo, which became the iconic symbol of Coney Island. But it features a man with this grotesque, wide, exaggerated smile, sometimes bearing as many as 44 visible teeth. So again, we're just seeing these same characteristics, and it seems to be associated with amusement parks, clowns, jesters, giants. But look at this photo. How creepy is this one? This iconic image was seen throughout Coney Island Steeplechase Park from its inception in 1897 until the park was demolished by Donald Trump's father in 1964. Interesting tidbit there, but something I wouldn't want looking at me for any extended period of time. It's really creepy. Here's just some more depictions of this steeplechase face. Now, this tradition was carried forward as far as amusement parks and the grinning men. We go to Asbury Park in New Jersey. This particular amusement park, they have their own version of the grinning man called Tilly. In just a couple articles, who is Tilly? Everything you need to know about the iconic face of Asbury Park. And I guess there was a fight to save Tilly, and I think this article is from 2020. So apparently they're trying to save the grinning man here. And you can see the likeness on some buildings. I don't know if they're still there, but this is just mentioning how the name Tilly might be a nod to the owner of Steeplechase Park. It might have been derived from his last name. Who knows? But yeah, again, just this tradition carried forward. And here's just another photo showing that particular grinning man. And I've also seen this grinning man show up in a TV series called Revolution. Now, it only was on air for 2 seasons from, I think, 2012 to 14, but it featured this nanotechnology that was responsible in the series. This nanotechnology was responsible for taking down the grid. People had to sort of restart society. And near the end of the series, this nanotechnology becomes self-aware and turns evil. And this nanotechnology wants to eventually just take over what's left of the world. And there's an interesting sequence at the end of the last episode of the series which mentions the grinning man, and I just want to play that for you real quick.
The nano are going to make the Patriots look like Boy Scouts, and there's nothing we can do to stop it. Aaron. And it all starts with this grinning man.
What grinning man? What does that mean?
Yeah, well, that was interesting. Yeah, an interesting little series with references to a lot of the things we talk about actually in our present reality. So might be worth a check out if you've got some free time. But let me move on to the next topic, which is Prison Wagon. Okay, this particular update will be a quick one. It's based off of a comment I received talking about this Carnival of Basil, which typically is held every year, and it's in Switzerland. But the comment I got was from this individual who he watched my video and he looked up this particular carnival from 2022. Some of the ceremonies were captured on a YouTube video, and he just was talking about how early on in the video he saw what appeared to be like a prison wagon for children, which is actually disturbing, but it's just something that's, right in our faces. And again, I'm sure it wasn't marketed like that, that's probably like a ride or something. But he also went on to mention that it reminded him of something he saw in a movie called Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. I guess it's an older movie. I've not seen it. I think he says it's from 1968, but that particular movie also features this child catcher, and there was an article from The Guardian talking about it, who plays the child catcher in this movie. But yeah, in this movie there's a scene where these children are lured to this prison wagon by candy, and it's, as you can see, it's all decorated, and it's you have clowns associated with it. So just very interesting, and I know it just brings to mind the legend of the Pied Piper and luring children with music. But I think with Pied Piper, there was also some images that show him depicted as looking like a clown. So just an interesting point, and I just wanted to bring it up. And thank you to the commenter for that. Now, what I want to talk about is I want to do another update on B.O.B. With regards to B.O.B., this term or name keeps coming up over and over again. And I've mentioned many times there's this rapper called B.O.B., and someone alerted me to the fact that he has a single on one of his albums called Pennywise. And of course, Pennywise is featured in the movie It from Stephen King. And I guess Pennywise was once a human by the name of Robert Gray or Bob. So just something to add on to it. But where I wanted to go with this particular update was in part 3 of this series, which you can find on my channel. I mentioned how the name B.O.B. Bob appears on the Illuminati card game on several of the cards. And this character, Bob, turns out there's like this parody religion called the Church of the Subgenius. And this figure, Bob, is like the one of the leaders of this church. And he goes by the name of J.R. Dobbs or Bob Dobbs. And I was mentioning in that part 3, there are several songs that feature these particular lyrics, which reference Bob Dobbs, Bob Dobalina, and it's repeated usually like 2-3 times. And this is from a 1991 song called Mr. Dobalina. And this particular song we're going to come back to, but yeah, this particular chorus, I've seen it at least in 2 other songs, one from a group called the Monkees back in 1967, very similar lyrics repeated, and also more recently in 2012 with this song called Think for Yourself by the Cottonmouth Kings, and featuring the Insane Clown Posse. But there's also some lyrics that are repeated multiple times, and Bob Dobbs comes up again. But yeah, so just really interesting. But getting back to that 1991 song, Mr. Dobalina, I mentioned in the previous video, when you look at the lyrics, you start getting into Mr. Dobalina is a serpent. And then there's also a reference to how Del is not down with any clowns or jesters, tying it together again. But what I missed and was reminded of in the comments is that there's another lyric in there, a verse that talks about how ever since I did a little show in Guadalupe, And what I missed is that beginning of that video, part 3, I touched upon this pilgrimage of clowns to the that was a devotion to the Lady of Guadalupe. So there's this pilgrimage that happens, I think it's once a year, but these clowns make a pilgrimage to this basilica in devotion to this Lady of Guadalupe. And I just missed that connection. So I wanted to just to mention that. But yeah, this song has so many tie-ins, and what I want to bring up here is this particular artist, Del the Funky Homo Sapien, who came up with that song, Mr. Dablina. He later on, and I think it was 2000, him and a few other people formed this supergroup, and they came out with an album of the same name as their group called Deltron 3030. But on this particular album, there is a song called Virus, and I'm just gonna play for you just the introductory line, and it's just chock full of, symbolism and things we talk about. So I'm just gonna play that one line real quick.
Global controls will have to be imposed, and a world governing body will be created to enforce them.
Yeah, so there you have it. Just really interesting. This person is definitely connected to the system. So I just wanted to show you that, and I just wanted to make one more video update. Also in the part 3 of the series, I touched upon this phenomenon called ocular migraines, where people will see these zigzag patterns, and I even mentioned how I experienced something like this. I think it happened to me like 2 or 3 times, where you would see these zigzag patterns, and it was just off to the right, very similar to this, but it was with my right eye, and it was this neon zigzag pattern that you would just see, and I wouldn't get a headache or anything, but I definitely noticed it, and it would last a few minutes and then it would just go away. So there's a term called ocular migraine that also features these zigzagging lines. So I touched on that in part 3, and as mentioned, this phenomenon can happen with or without a headache. But there are more severe versions of this, and I experienced one of these as well, where you can have complete vision loss for a short period of time. And it feels like you're looking through a kaleidoscope. And somebody sent me a comment talking about how they found a line from the Testament of Solomon, talking about this particular demon that can cause those who are subject to my hour to feel the pain of migraine. And if only I hear these words, at once I retreat. So there's this reference to a demon that can cause a migraine in this Testament of Solomon. But again, I don't know how much faith I put in this Testament of Solomon. It's one of these pseudo-epigraphical texts, so he might not be the author. But again, it's just an interesting element, because what was interesting about this attack when I suffered it was that when my vision completely went away for a couple minutes, and then it came back, and I was seeing stars, and I was seeing these zigzag patterns, and it was almost like I was looking through a kaleidoscope. What was interesting though is that after about 5 minutes, I felt I started to improve, and the whole right side of my face was numb, and so yeah, very scary. But as I started to improve after about 5 minutes, I felt quite literally something lifting up and out of my body, out of my brain, up and out. And as that was happening, I was hearing these crackling sounds, like electrical crackling, and also whatever it was, it had that, if I could describe it, it would almost felt like something with the consistency of honey. And I know that sounds very strange, but I came across, I was listening to this interview by Jerry Marzinski, and I have a portion of this on my YouTube channel in this video, Parasitic Mind Control. He dealt with patients who were schizophrenic, hearing voices, and he talks about some of his experiences where he also dealt with hearing these crackling sounds while interviewing patients, and he experienced this moment where he became extremely confused. He could hardly speak, and he felt like someone poured, I think he referred to it as poured maple syrup on his brain. And it was just really interesting because, I mean, he referred to it as maple syrup. I said honey, but like there's something was interacting with us, and it had this electrical component, and it had that same feeling. So I just wanted to share that with you guys, and I don't know what to make of all that, but it is unusual indeed. So I think we'll leave it here for today, but I wanted to send a thank you to all my patrons. We are up to 29 on our way to 150, hopefully. But yeah, all the help is greatly appreciated, and I just wanted to say thanks again. So until next time, take care. Bye. Hello everybody, and welcome back for another episode. Today we're going to be talking about the Nephilim Looked Like Clowns Part 5, and it's titled Got Milk. Now the reason why I settled on that title is because when you start looking into some of these rituals involving milk, you can find connections to satanic influences, the elite, milk baths, these baptisms, if you will, by milk. And there's just these really weird connections, and some of them even involve clowns. So that's where this video comes in. Now, as I started looking into this weird connection between clowns and milk cartons and all these sorts of things, I came across this clown called Milky the Clown, who I believe was local to the Detroit area. But there was this company, I believe, called Twin Pines, and this Milky the Clown was their mascot, and he even started appearing on milk cartons. And this clown, I believe he appeared on all three major Detroit television stations, primarily in the 50s and early part of the 60s. So just a lot of coverage of this clown. He's on milk cartons, and he was, as I said, he was the mascot for this Twin Pines dairy. And apparently they kept his face on milk cartons until the 1990s. So, okay, so what, right? There's a clown associated with this dairy company and milk, and his face is on milk cartons. But, you know, as we keep looking, there's this crossover with Milky the Clown and Bozo the Clown. And when you start digging into it, you can find Bozo the Clown associated with milk and milk cartons. He was on several milk cartons as well. So there seems to be this connection between milk and these clowns. And I don't think that that's just coincidental. I believe there's always like a bigger thing happening behind the scenes. And you know, when you start thinking about missing people, and I think this is just a scene from the movie Lost Boys, there was this other really unique phenomenon that happened. I believe it was in the 80s, and that was called the missing children on the milk cartons. There was this program that was instituted beginning in the early 1980s, where you had advertisements on milk cartons in the United States that were used to publicize cases of missing children. And I guess this campaign went on until the late 1990s. Where I'm going with this is, again, it's clowns and children always seem to be linked. And so it starts off primarily the 50s, 60s, 70s. You have the reinforcement of clowns and milk, and they're on these cartons. And then you go to the 80s, and there's this decision to put children on cartons. And you know, these things all seem to sort of come together, and I think there's more to it. And I can see how this would be traumatic, actually. This could cause trauma. You know, you had these milk cartons at the dinner table, and your children are staring at these missing children. And that might not be the best thing, actually, because I think very few direct successes were tied to either local or national campaigns. So on one hand, I understand it's a tool to help, but was the original intention something more nefarious? Who knows? But as many as 5 billion milk cartons were printed with the images and details of missing children from around the country. So I just think there's more to this whole phenomenon, and I think it's a conditioning, and once again, though, just this whole conditioning of children and clowns, and in this case, it was done through milk cartons. And milk, of all things. So just really weird. And I guess apparently faces of missing kids even adorned pizza boxes at one point. And well, we all know about, this whole concept of pizza and children. And I don't want to get into it, but you guys know. So again, just doesn't seem random, does it? Now, what I want to hit on is a really interesting documentary I came across called The Clown and the Candyman. Now, I was watching this documentary and, I actually planned to stop making videos in this series, The Nephilim Looked Like Clowns. But then, you just keep coming across more and more information that just seems to tie right in. So here we are. But I was watching this documentary and they were focused on John Wayne Gacy, the clown killer from Illinois. And they actually were detailing how they got a warrant to go to his house and do a search. So as they were going through his house, what they dubbed the murder home, it was filled with clown paintings and zigzag wallpaper. I mean, now if you've watched any of the previous episodes, I touch on these zigzag patterns and clowns. It's just so bizarre. And here's just some photos. There's a clown. There was a clown painting right above his bed, and he had this interesting wallpaper apparently with these zigzag patterns. Just strange, it's the context, right? These things seem to be associated with each other. And let me play you 24-second clip from this documentary, and it's just going to touch on these points.
From the time we went in, we could tell that he was marching to a different drummer, because the paint job, for example, the hall was painted brown, and then it had a zigzag gold lines going up and down through it. I mean, it was really weird. Clown pictures were everywhere. He had one right over his bed.
So yeah, very strange, very strange. Just as a refresher, we see the zigzag patterns and they seem to be associated with another dimension and possessing spirits. And there's this other phenomenon called liquid crystal polarization, and these people almost seem to be being possessed, and there's these black and white zigzag patterns. And you can even look to the American Southwest and ancient rock art, and you'll find these depictions of these really strange looking entities, and there's all these zigzag patterns on their person. And even if you look at some pottery bowls of the Anasazi, you have these really weird looking figures and these zigzag patterns. So man, it's just this context, because I think that these clowns and jesters, I think they're actually non-physical entities in an actual non-physical dimension. And as I've touched on, people see these jester type entities and they encounter clowns, jesters, and jokers while taking DMT. So I think there's a whole lot more to all of this, and just interesting stuff. And here's just another photo of the zigzag and the clown painting. And I guess John Wayne Gacy claimed to have an alter ego. So is this all a coincidence? I don't think it is, but I just wanted to present that to you guys. And now let me just hit on one video update. In a previous video, I touched upon this exhibit, this Maya exhibit, where they were showcasing a bunch of these pieces that were attributed to the Mayan Empire. And one of them was this container that quite literally looks like a clown. It's red hair, this pale-faced, and I think we're told, according to the narrative, that this is a spider monkey, but it just looks just very clownish. But this kind of prompted me to do a little bit more digging into the Mayan Empire, and of course you come across this worship of Quetzalcoatl, and you come to realize that this worship became widespread even down to the Yucatan Peninsula, where it caught on with the Maya. And then I came upon this order called the Order of Quetzalcoatl. This Order of Quetzalcoatl, known as the Q. Now, there have been other people who have come across this order, and they kind of just mentioned, obviously, how you have this order being known as the Q, and of course we have QAnon. Where did that come from? And one of their slogans apparently is, where we go one, we go all. So, again, is that random? Probably not. But for the purposes of this video and where my focus is, it's actually, when you start looking into this order, you realize they're comprised solely of Shriners. And once again, the Shriners, they have ties to clowns and jesters. And but apparently for this order, their main contribution is towards transportation funds for Shriner Hospital. These things just keep intertwining. And yeah, just a refresher, you have the Shriners Hospitals for Children where they dress up like clowns, And then there's another royal order called the Royal Order of Jesters, and that order is comprised solely of Shriners. And again, so you got jesters. You have jesters, jokers, clowns, and children. And you've got this Order of Quetzalcoatl. So just bizarre, but I just wanted to bring this to you guys' attention, and this was, I guess, just a license plate. Weird, very weird. So I think that is about it for today. And once again, I just wanted to thank my patrons. I believe we are up to 34, on our way to 100. And once again, really appreciate all the support that you guys have shown me. And yeah, much appreciated. So until next time, take care. Bye. Hello everybody, and welcome back for another video. Today we're talking the Nephilim Look Like Clowns, the Ainu people. Now before we get started, I just wanted to mention that the inspiration for this series comes from a channel called Understanding Conspiracy, and he did a 17-part series actually talking about the Nephilim looking like clowns several years ago. So I will leave a link to that in the description if you're interested. So getting back to Japan's forgotten people, let's talk about the Ainu. Now, this group of people, when you start digging in a little bit, you start looking into their origins and coming across information talking about how their origins are murky. But some scholars believe they are descendants of an indigenous population that once spread across northern Asia. Okay, fair enough. Now, I guess they were largely centered or located in and around this island called Hokkaido. And I believe it's the second largest Japanese island, but just another article talking about how the origin of the Ainu people and language is, for the most part, unknown. However, there are many theories, as there usually is. So what really captured my attention with this people are the tattoos that a lot of the women have, and they're very reminiscent of the painted on smile that you would see on the Joker, but these are actually tattoos. So whenever I see these interesting customs or initiations of indigenous peoples that can be tied to jokers and clowns, I'm very interested, because as I mentioned in previous videos talking about the Hopi people in the American Southwest and their sacred clowns, and they had these ceremonies where they would dress up as these sacred clowns and with these stripes and interesting headdress, and it's just all very, very interesting. And we also talked about in another episode the Selknam tribe in Tierra del Fuego, which is on the southern tip of South America, and they had their own ceremonies, initiations, and rituals where they would dress in the similar ways as the Pueblo clowns. And so just there seems to be an interesting connection with a lot of these indigenous peoples and these various customs and ceremonies and initiations, rituals that seem to be tied to these sacred clowns potentially. Now, looking into this tattooing a bit further, I came across an article talking about the tattooing among Japan's Ainu people. And just briefly, it just mentioned how that for the Ainu, tattooing was exclusive to females, as was the profession of tattooist. So yeah, I'm just really captivated by these tattoos that were a consistent element of this group of people. And I think it might actually in some way tie back to a feature of these beings that may have existed at one point and may now be non-physical. But this element that we see associated with clowns and these painted on smiles, but in this case they were tattoos. And I can't help thinking like there are a lot of customs that are mimicked, such as cranial headboarding, and you find like with the Paracas elongated skulls that there might have been this element of copying what was seen a long time ago with some of these tribes and or indigenous peoples, and that's what I think might be happening with these smiling tattoos. Maybe it's actually a replication of something that was seen in the past. And for the official explanation of these tattoos, apparently, according to some of the information that's out there, these tattoos were believed to prevent evil spirits from entering the body and causing sickness. The lip tattoos also indicated that a woman had reached maturity and was ready for marriage. And finally, lip tattoos assured the woman's life after death in the place of her deceased ancestors. So those are all valid, but like I said, I just keep looking at these indigenous cultures, and they have these interesting customs, initiation ceremonies, rituals, and I think some of it might be actually based on some of these beings that existed at one point in time. But again, that's just my speculation. But I just wanted to mention this was one of the implements that was used to apply these tattoos, an Ainu tattoo knife. Not looking like something I would ever want to try, but just wanted to mention that. And they also had this interesting custom tradition surrounding these bears. So bears have a special importance in Ainu culture, and apparently there are over 80 words in their language to describe bears. And they even would bring these bears into their homes, treating them as honored guests or as one of their own children. And there's a lot of interesting photos that you can find with this people and bears. So just wanted to mention that. But what are the odds? By itself, you look at it, that's an interesting custom that they have. But when you start looking at several of these indigenous cultures, you see these elements that keep popping up, and I just can't help wondering. So I just wanted to mention that. And of course, just one more point, this group of people, the Ainu, according to some narratives, the Ainu are considered to be descended from the Jomon people, who I guess inhabited the same regions. And this group of people, the Jomon people, they're the ones who had these really interesting figurines, the Dogu figurines with the large Google-eyed figurines, and they had a lot of interesting pottery as well. So there's speculation that the Ainu got a lot of their spiritual beliefs from this group of people. I'm not sure, but I thought it was just worth mentioning. So there's that. Okay, so now let me just move on to our second topic of the day, and that is the Joker in Hindu temples. Now, a couple of commenters alerted me to a new video that was released, I think it was in and around August 10th, by Praveen Mohan, and he has a popular YouTube channel as well as many appearances on Ancient Aliens. But he had a video that had an interesting thumbnail, just talking about how there's this crazy rule in Hindu temples that require a joker to be carved in every Hindu temple, which I never knew anything about, but I find pretty fascinating. And again, he was just saying every temple must have a joker, but why? So there's this particular figure in almost every Hindu temple, and it has this unique stance, as well as usually wearing a hat. Usually it has this irreverent behavior associated with it. And there's just a few different depictions here. And sometimes it has the hat, different types of hats. Sometimes this figure is holding an umbrella. But I believe the video is like less than 10 minutes long, so I will leave a link to it. But he believes it's this figure called Ashtavakra, and I believe this figure was known to be this self-realized saint. And I guess this person had rickets, according to the narrative, and that would explain the stance. And, you know, I'm not sure about all that, but the one thing that he brings up in this video is how wherever you see this particular carving, it's usually very close to other carvings of people engaged in lewd behavior, sometimes these sexual scenes, and he seems to have this irreverent behavior, very similar to what we see with these Joker and Jester figures. So I guess I would probably disagree with him on this interpretation, but interesting nonetheless, and I'll leave a link to the video so you can check it out. Lastly, I want to touch on just a little update on the curious case of B.O.B. Now, in several other episodes in the series, I just touched on how this name Bob pops up in interesting places, such as the Illuminati card game, and there's this figure Bob Dobbs, and this particular lyric pops up in at least 3 different songs that I've found, and it's usually repeated. And there's a rapper, B.O.B., and you've got this possessing spirit in Twin Peaks called Killer Bob, and it just pops up in these really interesting places. So apparently there's a new Top Gun movie called Maverick, and Maverick is played by Tom Cruise, and he's a fighter pilot, and he's an instructor in this particular movie, and he's training these new fighter pilots. They're all given these unique call signs, and there's one particular pilot that is a new character, and his call sign is Bob, B-O-B. Now, in the movie, his name is Bob as well. So I guess typically these call signs are supposed to be unique and different. They're not supposed to be your name. So it's just an interesting thing that one of these characters has the call sign Bob, and that's his actual name. But there was an article just talking about how in Top Gun Maverick, it never answered a mysterious question as to what B.O.B. actually stood for. And there's a lot of speculation as to what it stands for, but it never is actually mentioned as to what it stands for in the movie. So I just thought that was interesting and worth a mention. And somebody also alerted me to this company called Arla, and I guess they have a new type of milk, and it's B.O.B. milk, which I guess in this case stands for best of both worlds. But they're just mentioning here on their website how it's a bit of a strange name at first, but once you get to know it, it all makes sense. And I guess it combines the benefit of fat-free skim milk with all the delicious flavor of semi-skim milk. So just something that this connection with dairy that I've talked about previously, but I don't know, just an interesting little thing that I've come across, and I just wanted to mention it. Now, I think the plan is to take a break from the series. I know not everybody is interested in these topics as I am, but I know there's a lot of you who are interested. But like I said, I'll probably take a break from this particular topic for a while, but there is that 17-part series. I'll leave a link, and I think that's about it. And once again, I just wanted to give a big shout out to all my patrons. Your help is always greatly appreciated, and I just wanted to say thanks to them once again. So I think that's about it for today, and until next time, take care. Bye. Hey everybody, welcome back for another video. Today we're going to be talking about the Nephilim Looked Like Clowns with a focus on the Phantom Clown Scare of 1981. Now, once again, I thought I was retired, but I came across some more information that I found really interesting, so I wanted to present it to you guys. Maybe you'll feel the same way. So let's get into it. Now, prior to 2016, the clown panic, I wasn't aware of any other clown scares in our past, but turns out in 1981 that was the precursor to what happened in 2016. And you have articles like this talking about these phantom clowns terrorizing the US since 1981, and there's other articles saying the creepy clown sightings actually started in the 80s. And I just put together several of these articles just mentioning how the clown scare of 1981 might have started in Massachusetts and it appeared across Boston. So there is an interesting aspect to this clown scare of 1981, because when we start to look at it and then look at what happened in 2016, we're going to see a whole lot of similarities. And it almost looks like in both cases, a lot of this has been engineered. So we're going to look at that. So we have these sightings of clowns in 1981 primarily. So let's get a little more detailed information from some of these articles. Basically, you had children were reporting that evil clowns attempted to lure them into vans. And the clowns were actually never seen by adults. And there were no arrests, no photographs, and no evidence, and no abductions. And this person here, Lauren Coleman, I guess he coined the term phantom clowns. But to this day, the 1981 phantom clowns remains a total mystery. Okay, so we've got all these sightings of clowns by children, and these clowns are attempting to lure children into vans. That'll come into play later. And back in 2016, they interviewed this person again, this Lauren Coleman. He was just talking about the phantom clown theory that dates back to 1981. Okay, so what was the other thing that happened in early 1980s as well? You had, and I'm just going to refer to it as the panic, just to try to avoid the algorithm, but there was a lot of concern and a lot of panic with regards to this right here. So that was the second thing that was going on in and around that time frame. And the third thing, as you can see here, you had the rise of Dungeons and Dragons. How Dungeons and Dragons became a part of the 1980s panic. What I'm trying to lay out, there's a whole chain of events here. You have these clown sightings. You have the rise of this panic, and then you also have the rise and the spread of Dungeons and Dragons. And it turned out that there was a book written in 1981 called Mazes and Monsters, and they adapted that into a made-for-TV movie called Mazes and Monsters. And it featured actually Tom Hanks. I think it was maybe his first starring role. But interesting thing about that book cover, looks a little suspect, doesn't it? If we turn it on its side, an interesting number. But getting back to the made-for-TV movie, Mazes and Monsters, they actually flashed this graphic right at the beginning of the movie. So just an interesting side note. But another thing about the whole Mazes and Monsters and what happened around this time, there was a missing student who they believed was lost in tunnels, and there was a big media frenzy around it. There was a search to find this person who went missing, the student, and it turned out that I guess he wasn't down there, but the media was running with it anyway, and just a big debacle. But tunnels features into this as well. There's a big focus on tunnels, on Dungeons and Dragons, and on the panic, and on the clown sightings. And also what happens after all of this, after the clown scare, you have the release of Stephen King's It. Now it's a little bit later, 5 years after the clown scare of 81, but Pennywise is introduced after the fact. So that's an interesting chain of events. Well, let's flash forward to 2016 when you had the clown panic of that year. So police were on alert as clowns tried to lure children into the woods. So we had in 1981, there were clowns trying to lure children into vans. In 2016, clowns trying to lure children into the woods. And crisis got so bad, the White House was deferring to the FBI. Stephen King hits hysteria, and apparently the World Clown Association is not happy, or was not happy, about these people dressing up as clowns. Now, you had this craze was sweeping social media, including Twitter. So we had all these clown sightings once again. And just like in 1981, then what else went viral in 2016? I'm not going to use this word. I'm just going to say gate, try to avoid the algorithm. But this whole situation involving gate happened, went viral, and it was actually referred to as the panic of our age. So the panic related to this subject ramped up again in 2016, just like it did in 1981. Interesting. And there was another offshoot of the gate, and that is underground tunnels. Once again, these things just keep popping back up. So again, I think all this, it's engineered. I don't doubt there's a reality to a lot of these things. I'm not saying there's no truth in them. I'm just saying they were being spread by the mainstream, and they're fanning the flames. Now, what happens after these things? What else happens in 2016? You have the release of Stranger Things. And what is a aspect of Stranger Things? It is Dungeons and Dragons. You had the real star of Stranger Things is Dungeons and Dragons. So the rise in popularity of Dungeons and Dragons is a direct result of Stranger Things. And they're still, I think, in season 4 of Stranger Things, it's even featured a little more prominently. It's just the timing of it all, it's just so interesting. We got, just like in 81, we have the clowns trying to lure children, all the clown sightings. Then we have the rise of this panic that goes viral due to this, and it involves these tunnels as well. And then we have this Stranger Thing rolls out, and they reintroduce Dungeons and Dragons to the mainstream once again. And what comes after this, the next year, the movie It is it comes back to the big screen. And there's just these eerie similarities. And I don't think they're just coincidences. I think this was crafted. I think these events were crafted. And this is just an article. I guess because of release of the movie in 2017, people were interested in getting their hands on the 1986 novel, It by Stephen King. And this is just some bookstore in London, Ontario, saying they were out of the book from 1986. So just fascinating. Like I just never really, I didn't even know about the 1981 scare. And I didn't realize they're all the similar events, the panic, Dungeons and Dragons, the clown sightings, tunnels, and the release of the book. And in 2016 and 17, you have the movie instead of the book. Just wild stuff. So I just wanted to bring this to your guys' attention, and I think I'll leave it here with that. But let me just do a quick update on B.O.B. Now, somebody mentioned this song that came out by Outkast called Bombs Over Baghdad, and I've heard of this song. I just didn't know that it was actually also referred to as B.O.B., and it was written like this. I've never actually seen the video, but I've heard the song, but I wasn't aware that it was laid out like that. And of course, when you watch the video, there's just a ton of references to Bob, and you have the obligatory person with a painted white face. And I came across another song called the Bob Song that was sung by Willie Nelson, but it was actually first released by this duo, Big and Rich, in 2004. But some of the lyrics, it just talks about once knowing a pirate named Bob, and then actually spells out B.O.B. Bob, and then B.O.B. Bob again. So that's kind of this repetition. I just wonder if they're working these things into some of these songs, because B.O.B. pops up a lot. And this whole Bob Dobbs, I've mentioned this before, but this song from the Monkees called Zilch in 1967. It has this repetitive pattern with Bob and Bob Dobbs. And you can also see that, I think this was Del the Funky Homo Sapien, Mr. Dublina. Some of the lyrics talk about Bob and Bob Dobbs again, and it repeats. And then there was the song by, Think for Yourself by the Cottonmouth Kings featuring the Insane Clown Posse. And there were some lyrics that were repetitive, talking about Mr. Bob Dobbs, Bob Dobalina, all that stuff. So it appears in many, many songs, and you have to wonder what they're getting at. So that's all I have with regards to that, and I think that's about it for today. But I have an idea for one more video actually with regards to another subject, so I might have to hold off my semi-retirement once again. But I think that's it for today. I want to thank my patrons for all your help and support. Really appreciate all you guys, and thank you very much. So with that said, until next time, take care. Bye. Hey everybody, welcome back for another video. Today we're going to be talking the Nephilim Look Like Clowns with a focus on the cave paintings, and primarily the cave paintings in Baja, California, because there are a lot of really interesting murals that sort of tie into this subject as a whole. So let's get into it. Now, on the Baja Peninsula, there are up to 400 sites that are fairly remote, but they have a lot of these murals associated with these sites, these cave paintings basically. And a lot of the area has been declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site, I think back in the early 90s. But when you start looking at some of these murals, you're going to notice a lot of the things that we look into with regards to jesters and clowns. And as mentioned, a lot of these sites are in the central region of the Baja Peninsula. And some of them are on ceilings as well in harder to reach places, and some are up to 10 feet. So they vary in size, but you will note here that several of these figures are split horizontally at the waist, and the one on the far right is decorated with vertical stripes. A little hard to see, but these are the ones that really interest me, where you have the split horizontal stripe pattern and or vertical pattern, sorry. And of course we got the protrusions on top of the head, which we can tie into the jesters as well. But just really interesting with these split colors, typically red and black in this case, but we see this, some examples in the real world of this, and we're going to show that here. But I also wanted to mention that no one has been able to explain why so many of the figures in the caves throughout Baja are split down the middle and multicolored, usually red and black. So where do we see this? You know, I was talking in a previous episode about the convict uniforms and some of the ones in Australia, and they made them, this was back in the 1800s, I believe, and they had these almost like jester outfits, but in this case they were black and yellow, but it just kind of reminds me of this split pattern, the vertical split pattern that we see. So there's a lot of these sites, and somebody has taken the effort to sort of represent them, put them up on their website here, which can be found here. But when you look at some of these representations, obviously what sticks out as well are the protrusions from the head, right? You know, here's some more, and we're going to dive into a couple of these specifically, but we see with a lot of the Native American populations, they have these sacred clowns, and we see that represented in some of their traditions and customs as well. And even in the Selknam tribe in Tierra del Fuego had some things similar to this. So it's interesting that this pops up on the Baja Peninsula as well. But yeah, of course, jesters and tricksters, people who take DMT, they see figures that have these protrusions on the top of their heads, and we see this and just show up a lot, and some of these split patterns. So really interesting. And there's another site here that I want to touch on, and specifically we're going to look at this figure and we're going to zoom in on it. And in addition to the two protrusions, sometimes they'll have almost something that almost looks like an antenna coming out from the top of their head. And this one is interesting to me because what else do we associate with some clowns? There's that whole phenomenon of the miniature umbrellas, right? Why are these mini umbrellas associated with these clowns going back to at least the 30s? You know, we see it. And you just start looking at this stuff. And I know it does seem like a reach, but the more you look into it, I don't think it is a reach. I think it's just this weird representation, you know, spilling into reality. And just umbrellas in general associated with clowns. It's a fairly common theme. So yeah, I thought that was very, very interesting to see that. And also another one of these representations on at one of these sites, to me, first thing I thought of when I saw this particular guy is the barrel clowns, right? Like circus clowns, sometimes they'll wear these barrels, and in the rodeo you have the rodeo clowns or barrel men, and you know, they'll don these barrels as well. As far as rodeo clowns, they go by rodeo clowns or barrel men, and their sole job is to keep the crowd entertained throughout slower moments of the rodeo. So I could kind of see why they would use a barrel potentially for protection, and I guess you can use it as a prop, but just an interesting thing to associate with both circus clowns and rodeo clowns, and it just reminded me of that. So just one of those odd things, but I guess they can tell by looking at some of these murals that much of the work is superimposed over previous layers, indicating that the paintings were likely laid down over several hundred or thousands of years. Now, as far as the date of these paintings, there's a lot of interesting back and forth, because I guess in 2002 there was some radiocarbon dating done of the pigment binders of one particular site, and they came back with a date of approximately 7,500 years old. But I guess there is some dispute about the methodology involved in the study and its validity. And when you start looking into the dating of rock art, it turns out there's a lot of controversy. And these are just 2 articles. I could have put 5 more here, but this one article, estimating the ages of rock art, is one of the most challenging tasks of archaeology, and it's riddled with controversies. And another one just saying how worldwide there have been far more dubious claims about rock art dating, and it's a significant problem in archaeology. So these dates, you know, I'm very skeptical of any dates in general, but especially with rock art. But the whole phenomenon, though, is very interesting. I did not know that these existed in the numbers that they existed in as well, and really interesting. But as far as who created them, for what purpose, apparently there was a native population in the area called the Cochimi, and the Cochimi disavowed any relation to the paintings, saying that they were made by a race of giants from the north. And unfortunately for the Cochimi, they were decimated by epidemics of old world diseases, and their populations declined until sometime in the 19th or possibly even the early 20th century. Their language and traditional culture became extinct. So very unfortunate indeed. But there's potential connection to giants that we are told anyway, if we're to believe what we're being told. So I just wanted to mention this connection as well. But just a really fascinating connection between some of this rock art and potentially the Nephilim and the clown phenomenon. So I just wanted to bring that up. And also, there are some really interesting petroglyphs of figures that have the 2 protrusions from the head, very gesture-like. This one in Albuquerque, New Mexico. So I just wanted to mention that. And also, there is actually another painted rock site in Santa Margarita, California, but it's harder to make out the figures, as you can see here. But I just wanted to mention it as an aside. So that's all I have for that particular topic. I just want to hit on one more topic, and it's going to relate to fashion, and we're going to talk about the razzle dazzle. So going back to just after World War I and into the 1920s, a lot of interesting fashions were being brought into the mainstream, and there were these what are called the dazzle balls, and people would dress in these costumes inspired by dazzle camouflage, and again, a lot of these striped patterns, and they would even have a lot of these vertical stripes, horizontal stripes, and dressing like jesters and all these sorts of things. And again, just an attempt, I think, to bring a lot of these looks into the fashion of the day. But so that this was going on in the 1920s, basically, and you even had the early development of these monochromatic patterns and a lot of interesting design choices being introduced to the public in the 1920s. And even swimsuits, in as far as some of the fashions, dazzle swimsuits. And this goes back, I believe, to 1919. So they were introducing a lot of this stuff after World War I. The newest thing in bathing suits, Brighton, the beach at Margate in England. So the dazzle designs. So just an interesting thing. And they even brought this into the war efforts, and you had the dazzle ships. Dazzle camouflage, also known as razzle dazzle or dazzle painting, was a military camouflage paint scheme used on ships extensively during World War I and to a lesser extent World War II. But I guess they were using it as a means to be a little harder to target from the German U-boats. So whether it actually worked, I'm not too sure, but here's just some of these battleships and really interesting designs on them, to be sure. But I guess the premise is like, this is just sort of a recreation of what a submarine ship commander would see if he had his periscope raised above water. This is what they might see if they're looking at a normal ship versus one of these dazzle painted ships. So I guess the theory is that it would be harder to hit one of these ships that were designed in this way. So I just wanted to bring that up. And so it's just some interesting things happening in and around, or just after World War I, I should say. So I think that's about all I have for you for today. I did want to mention, I believe the channel that inspired this series, actually, Understanding Conspiracy, I guess he has recently kind of come back online, and that's about all I know at this point. And I would just recommend checking him out if you're interested in this series, and maybe showing him a little bit of support. So I think that's all I have to say for today, and I want to give a big shout out to my patrons. Really appreciate all of your help, and couldn't do it without you, so thank you very much. So with that said, I'll leave it here, and until next time, take care. Bye. Hey everybody, welcome back for another video. Today we're talking the Nephilim Look Like Clowns with a focus on B.O.B. or Bob. Now normally I do little updates on B.O.B. at the end of videos where I'm talking about the Nephilim Look Like Clowns, but I've got some more information and we're gonna do a full-length video on B.O.B. So let's get started. Now I got interested in this particular Bob phenomenon when I came across the Illuminati card game. Just happened to notice there's one name that comes up more than any other name, and it is B.O.B. And then there's reference to this parody religion called the Church of the Subgenius, and their prophet is this individual named Bob Dobbs. And then I started coming across several songs, like 3 or 4 songs that have Bob Dobalina or Bob Dobbs in repeating fashion in those songs. And so I thought that was pretty interesting. And there's the infamous rapper B.O.B. and there's just a ton of other references that pop up in really interesting places. So it's just something I've been tracking. But as far as who Bob is, I believe he could be a demonic entity of sorts. But there seems to be some interaction actually with these gestures, these clowns. You know, I've speculated as Bob the Hat Man, or what people refer to as the Hat Man or the Grinning Man. I'm not certain about that, but Bob appears to be like a ringleader, ringmaster, if we're sticking with the clown and circus metaphor. So I kind of wanted to dig into that now. The title or inspiration for the title of this video actually came from a comment I received. Somebody telling me to look into the movie Looper, which is actually a pretty good movie. It's got some science fiction elements to it. But in the movie, there's this child who grows up to be this tyrant in the future. But as a child, in his room, he's got this poster of what looks like, a scene from a Western movie, this character. And it says, it's like a wanted poster. It says, "Wanted Bad Bob." And the way he's dressed, he's got the hat and just the full Western getup. But later on, this child grows up and he has his own followers, these henchmen, and they kind of dress in a similar way to that poster. And so they got the hats and the coats. So it's just kind of interesting, this reference to Bob or B.O.B. Now, normally I probably wouldn't have mentioned it, but I came across another movie in 1972. There is a movie called The Life and Times of Judge Roy Bean, and it features an appearance by this character called Bad Bob. And Bad Bob, this is a Western movie, and I believe it's also a comedy, but Bad Bob, in addition just to that name and very similar look to the wanted poster in Looper, but Bad Bob is actually an albino gunslinger. So he's got all the white features and just eerily similar to this poster in the movie Looper. So I just thought that was pretty interesting. 2 references to Bad Bob. So just something of note. Now, another comment had me looking into a TV series called Dimension 404. And they were telling me how there is a whole episode dedicated to Bob. And it turns out in this episode, Bob is actually a depressed supercomputer, belongs to the NSA. So I thought that was interesting, but it got me looking down the road of, supercomputers, AI, all these things. And I started coming across a lot more connections. And the rapper B.O.B. again in 2022, last year, he released an album called Artificial Intelligence. And so I came across that, thought it was interesting. And then I started coming across other references to B.O.B. with regards to AI and things like that. There's a company that has this product called the Bob Assistant, and it's artificial intelligence for predictive maintenance. So they've got their website, bobassistant.com, but it's a solution to monitor your machines 24/7. And I'm not actually sure what that acronym stands for. I did a quick look, but just another reference to Bob in AI. So pretty interesting. So then I kept digging, and I came across this concept of Alice and Bob. And Alice and Bob, this duo originally started out as a standardized way to explain cryptography. And over time, the duo has been adopted in explanations of mathematics, physics, quantum effects, and other arcane places. So I think this was developed in late 1970s. So instead of saying A and B, you would say Alice and Bob. But it's interesting that it first came into being as a standardized way to explain cryptography, because when I started looking along these lines of Alice and Bob, turns out there is a company called Alice and Bob, and they deal with quantum computers. We build powerful quantum computers to solve your hardest problems. So just an interesting, choice of names here. And there's these associations between Bob now and AI and these quantum computers, building an ideal quantum computer, Alice and Bob. So looking into Alice and Bob, came across this incident with the chatbots with Facebook AI that were out of control in 2017. There's a bunch of stories that talk about how Facebook had to shut off its AI experiment after the 2 robots, these chatbots, began speaking in their own language that only they could understand. So you had this AI go rogue and create their own language. This is how Facebook shut down AI robots, developed their own language, and the symbolism, the one-eye symbolism, isn't lost on me. But this story pretty much was everywhere in 2017. So they're trying to impress upon us that AI could go rogue at any moment. But, I thought that was interesting. Yes. So just as mentioned, there was a bunch of articles talking about these rogue chatbots, this AI, and just a bunch of articles talking about it. But yeah, so there's just a lot of references with Bob, artificial intelligence, computers. And there was this another channel, somebody left me a message saying that there's another channel who's been looking into the computer simulation. He believes we're in a simulation. I don't share those views, but he talks about these things and gematria, numbers, and things like that. But he stumbled upon the Bob phenomenon along his own avenues of research. So I just thought I'd mention it. You could check it out. There's his channel name. But so somebody else is coming across some of this stuff as well in their own journey. So interesting. Now, I want to talk old school computing because there are some more references to Bob. So all the way back in 1995, it turns out Microsoft released this user interface called Microsoft Bob, and it didn't stick around too long. I believe it was discontinued in early 1996, so not even a full year, but it was just this graphical interface intended for novice users. So in place of your desktop environment, you would have this simplified interface that you could go into your file system and do all kinds of things, but just an interesting name for a user interface. But that was back in 95. Now, back in 2011 or 12, I came across this modem router combination, but the actual router was called the Bob, and there was another version called the Bob Lite. And there were some reviews written about the product, and I think it was back in 2011, but they're just talking about how this particular modem router isn't a speed demon, but it's simple to connect and powerful for such a cheap router. But what I found interesting is as they were talking about it, they mentioned the acronym BOB, and it actually stands for broadband in a box. And they're just mentioning how in a previous review of the other router that was produced, the Bob and the Bob Lite, they just mentioned how the acronym doesn't make sense. Because if it stands for broadband in a box, it should be BIAB, not BOB. So just an interesting element to the name. It doesn't quite match what they're saying it represents. So just wanted to mention that. Thought it was interesting. So those are just some things that I wanted to touch on with Bob showing up in weird and unusual places. But now let me just do an update on the Nazca lines. Now, the University of Yamagata has been doing studies on the Nazca lines for the last several years. They've been finding more of these lines. A lot of them are smaller, but I believe just last year, actually, not too long ago, they found another 168 geoglyphs. Now, why I'm touching upon this is, and some of these look pretty ridiculous, but they discovered some of these depictions of humanoid type beings, but they've got the protrusions from the head again. And they're just kind of highlighting what it might have looked like. But I'm not sure if they're pulling a fast one on us here, but the university has been there for several years. And back in 2019, they actually had found another 140 of these depictions, and they found more of these figures. Some of them have the protrusions from their head, and I just wanted to point that out. And I think this one is about 4 meters wide, so they're smaller in scope, but I just wanted to mention it because they kind of tie into some of these other things we're looking at with the protrusions from their head. So I thought it was interesting, because in, I believe, the previous Nephilim Looked Like Clowns video, I touched upon the Baja Peninsula and some of these other depictions as well. So just interesting stuff and what people see when they take DMT, or some people see. So it all seems to come together to some degree. So I just thought I'd mention it, and I think that's all I got for you for today. Once again, big shout out to all my patrons. Really appreciate you guys. So thank you very much. And with that said, until next time, take care. Bye.
Alice and Bob, building ideal quantum computers.
Hey everybody, welcome back for another video. Today we're talking about the Nephilim Look Like Clowns with a focus on the cone heads. Now we're just gonna have some fun with this today, but this phenomenon of the elongated skulls, it is very interesting because a lot of these skulls, they appear to be something unique unto themselves, and I do believe we're looking at a totally different group of people who had their own customs and religion, and they've been largely written out of the official history. But I think some of the actual physical characteristics of these people, I believe some of those characteristics have been incorporated into the appearance of what we refer to as a clown or a jester. And because it's harder to represent in real life, I think that might be why we have the adopting of these conical hats that are also worn by clowns and other people. Now again, this is all speculative and none of this is proof, but it gives us a good opportunity to just talk about these conical or pointy hats. And there's a large association between them and clowns, wizards, witches, things like this. So we're just going to talk about that briefly. Yeah, so you see these conical hats associated with a lot of these clowns, very creepy looking, especially in black and white. But it goes back all the way to the 1800s as far as with clowns. But there was another interesting aspect to all this is you have these pointy hats and this concept of class clowns. Children who step out of line, they're forced to wear these conical hats in the classrooms. At least in Europe and North America, there was this conical hat referred to as the dunce cap. And you would be brought up to the front of the class and you would potentially stand or sit on this stool and you would just basically stay there for a period of time. So it's this act of humiliation while wearing one of these hats. So just the whole evolution of this is interesting to me. And this is just another photo, boys' school, 1905, and some female students with an exaggerated version of these dunce caps, and this is from 1890. So I was interested just seeing where this originated from, and before I get to that, there was some other aspects to the humiliation where some children would be forced to just sit in a corner and stare at the wall, something you definitely couldn't get away with today. But apparently this lasted, at least in North America, all the way up to the 1950s, at least according to this information. And even more recently, it was banned in several areas in England and Wales in 2010. So just such an odd thing to have in the classroom. And apparently it all traces back to this one person. I believe he was a Franciscan priest as well as a philosopher, theologian. John Duns Scotus largely lived during the 1200s, but he had some interesting ideas about these coned hats, and he apparently endorsed wearing a basic cone hat as he believed that such hats acted as a cosmic funnel whereby one could receive knowledge directly from the universe. So how true is all that? Again, I don't know, but this is just where they tell us these dunce caps trace back to is this individual who had some interesting ideas. But moving ahead here, there's some interesting variations of the dunce cap. One is with donkey ears, and I've just got some depictions of some of these other dunce caps, and this is just a postcard showing another one of these variations. And this is a young Bridget Bardot wearing another variation of the dunce cap. So again, none of this, like I said, is proof, and it's just interesting to talk about. But could they actually have their origins? Could they trace back as sort of a nod to these beings and how they actually appeared? I think that's the speculation. But this idea of wearing this particular type of headgear in public humiliation is carried forward even today in different aspects. You had during the Reformation, when people would get arrested, they would be forced to wear these conical hats, and depending on the severity of the crime, you'd get a different colored conical hat. But there's still brotherhoods within the Catholic faith that practice this certain form of penitence, where I believe just before Easter, people who felt they needed penance, they would perform this ritual where they would go out in public wearing this specific type of headgear. And yeah, just an interesting thing to carry forward. But this reminds me a lot of what a lot of these lost tribes of Tierra del Fuego some of their initiations and rituals would call for them to dress in this certain way as well. And again, Tierra del Fuego is at the southern tip of South America, and a lot of these tribes no longer exist. One of them was the Selknam. There's interesting correlations all over the world with these conical hats and headgear. And I am familiar with the hate group in North America, but we won't go there. But again, I think it could have some tie-ins to an actual race of beings in our ancient past. So yeah, just really something to keep an eye on. And even in the late medieval period, you had some of the members of royalty, some of the women would wear these interesting headdresses. They called it a hennin. So it shows up all over. And even in the western deserts of China, these are the famous Caucasian mummies that were found in the Tarim Basin within this desert. And it was the mystery of the Caucasian mummies. And a lot of these mummies were found, they were, in addition to being Caucasian, they red-headed, blonde-haired, just something people weren't expecting to find in the western part of China. But another interesting aspect to these mummies, a lot of them had these pointy hats, these conical hats, and some of the female mummies were referred to as the witches of Subeshi. And these are just some more images of these mummies and their interesting headgear. The origin of this, who knows, but we're just considering the possibility it's a nod to these beings. But these female mummies were buried in these tall cone-shaped hats nearly 2 feet high. So I just wanted to point that out. I thought it was really interesting. And going back to this particular mummy referred to as the Churchin Man, I guess he was buried with up to 10 hats. And I guess even one of those was a conical witch hat. And according to some of the information out there, these type of hats were commonly found with many of the mummies that they found. And I believe they've found hundreds of these mummies. So just a unique and interesting phenomenon. But they also find mummies with interesting headdress, not only in Western China, but in Japan. They found some of these Buddhist mummies with some interesting headgear as well, somewhat related to the topic that we're covering here today. So just wanted to mention it. And just the whole reason, wizards, witches, and these pointy hats, some of these conical hats, where does it all point back to? Because it's kind of murky when you start trying to trace it back to its origin. But I think maybe it could tie in, once again, to these Nephilim potentially. Now, even Mother Goose, the nursery rhymes associated with Mother Goose, who may or may not be a real character, but they've given or portrayed Mother Goose with one of these pointy hats on a goose. So just wanted to mention that. And the history of Mother Goose is an interesting one unto itself, and you can search that up on YouTube if you want. Yeah, so I just wanted to really talk about these pointy hats, the conical hats, possible connections to these elongated skulls and these people. So just something of interest, and I wanted to bring it to your guys' attention. So having said that, let me talk and switch gears, talk about the old gods. Now, the zigzag pattern is something I've also talked about in previous episodes of this series, and there seems to be some association with these clowns, these zigzag patterns, and I believe it was the murder home of John Wayne Gacy. They found paintings of clowns all over the place, and all this zigzag patterns, wallpaper throughout his home. And, just looking into the zigzag pattern, what potentially could it be representing? Certain directors like David Lynch, who works this theme into a lot of his projects, and in some cases it represents this alternative dimension. And why that's kind of interesting is there's this phenomenon called liquid crystal polarization, and it appears people are being enveloped by these zigzag black and white patterns. So just, something quite interesting. And these patterns also show up in videos talking about these other dimensions. This was Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, and this is supposed to be Alice in Wonderland, this alternate dimension, and all these interesting, unique patterns. So I like to keep my eye out for some of these zigzag patterns wherever they appear, and that brings us to northeast Syria, where in the early 1900s there was this temple found and they found hundreds of these figurines referred to as the eye idols of Tel Brak. So what's of interesting or note to us is that a lot of these figurines have, once again, these interesting zigzag patterns over them. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that hundreds of alabaster eye idol figurines were unearthed, and it was one of the earliest cities of northern Mesopotamia. But just the exaggerated eyes and, once again, the zigzag pattern. Now they're just saying in this article how they're depicting clothes, which could definitely be the case, but I guess I'm just sort of keeping the door open to there's other possibilities, because again, these representations of whatever these figurines are representing, these could be actual beings in another dimension, or at one point they were physical, who knows. But I think there could be more to the patterns that we're seeing with these beings in particular. And there's a lot of variations, single-eyed idol types, and you can just see all these different variations, and multi-eyed idol types. And then you even have the sort of eye within an eye type. But yeah, just really unique figurines that I kind of just wanted to share with you guys. And I guess some of them even have more conical headgear or heads themselves. So very unique in and of themselves. And I just wanted to bring them to your guys' attention. And of course, the American Southwest, a lot of petroglyphs and a lot of pottery showing these patterns as well. So it shows up in a lot of interesting and unique places. So yeah, just wanted to sort of add this to the list of things associated with the zigzag phenomenon. So I think that's all I got for you for today. Once again, I want to give a big shout out to all my patrons. Your help and support is always greatly appreciated, and I thank you very much. So until next time, guys, take care. Bye.